From my library in New York, surrounded by shelves that have slowly yellowed with time, I sometimes pull down a familiar spine and feel a strange resistance in my hands. 1984 is one of those books. I read it several times in my youth, at an age when everything felt urgent, when dystopia seemed like a warning flare meant for some distant future. Returning to it now, older, more skeptical, and perhaps more tired, I realize that the most impactful passages have not lost their power. If anything, they have deepened, like a scar that becomes more visible with age. The line that still stops me cold appears near the very end. He loved Big Brother. I remember, as a young reader, feeling almost betrayed by that sentence. I had invested so much hope in Winston's inner rebellion, in his stubborn insistence on thinking forbidden thoughts. Even when he was broken physically, I believed, naively, that something inside him would remain untouched. Reading that final line again from this quiet New York room, I no longer feel betrayal. I feel recognition. That may be the most unsettling shift of all. What strikes me now is how quiet the sentence is. No violence, no screaming, no dramatic execution. Just a simple declaration of love. And that is precisely why it devastates. The party does not merely destroy Winston, it succeeds in rewriting his emotional core. This is not defeat in the traditional sense, it is transformation. As I reread it, I understand more clearly that Orwell was never primarily interested in prisons or torture chambers. He was interested in what happens when power reaches into the mind and rearranges the furniture there until resistance feels unnatural. When I was younger, I thought the horror of the novel lay in surveillance. The telescreens, the informers, the constant fear of being watched. Now I see that those are only tools. The true terror is that Winston's private thoughts, once his last refuge, are no longer his own. That realization hits harder now, living in an age saturated with noise, opinion, and invisible pressures. The betrayal in that final line is not just political, it is existential. Winston does not merely submit, he agrees. Worse, he feels. I find myself lingering on that word, loved. Love is supposed to be voluntary, intimate, human. By forcing love, the party commits its greatest crime. It does not settle for obedience. It demands emotional alignment. Sitting here, decades after my first reading, I realize that this is the novel's bleakest insight. A system that can command love has erased the very idea of freedom. At that point, rebellion is no longer even imaginable. Another passage that continues to haunt me comes earlier, when O'Brien explains the nature of power. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. As a teenager, I read that line as provocation, almost melodrama. Today it feels chillingly precise. There is no utopia promised, no ideological endpoint. Power exists solely to reproduce itself. That sentence strips away any illusion that cruelty might serve a higher purpose. It is cruelty as structure, as permanence. What unnerves me now is how calm O'Brien is when he says it. There is no rage in him, no fanaticism, just certainty. From my adult perspective, that calm feels more dangerous than any shouting tyrant. It suggests a world where oppression has become rational, bureaucratic, even mundane. The boot does not stomp in fury. It presses down methodically, forever. I also find myself returning to Room 101 and Winston's betrayal of Julia. Do it to Julia! Remains one of the most shocking moments in literature. In my youth, I saw it as the point of no return, the moment Winston truly falls. Now I see it differently. It is not the end. It is preparation. The real end comes later, in that quiet acceptance, in the rewriting of love itself. Room 101 breaks him. The final line remakes him. As I look around my library, I notice how many books are about resistance, courage, and moral clarity. 1984 stands apart because it refuses comfort. It does not offer the reader a heroic afterimage. It leaves us with a man sitting peacefully, loving the thing that destroyed him. That image stays with me far longer than any dramatic act of defiance could. Reading Orwell again as an adult, I understand that the novel's power lies not in its prophecy, but in its psychology. The reason readers still debate its most impactful passage is because it touches something deeply personal: the fear that under enough pressure, even our inner convictions might not survive. The final line endures because it denies us escape. It tells us that inner freedom is not guaranteed, that it must be defended constantly, or it can be taken without a trace. Closing the book, I place it back on the shelf with a sense of unease that feels strangely appropriate. He Loved Big Brother is not dramatic, not loud, not cinematic. It is final, absolute. The soundless moment when a human soul is erased, and the reader is left alone to ask whether they would fare any better. In conclusion, returning to 1984 by George Orwell after many years is not simply an act of rereading, but an act of reckoning. What once felt like a political warning aimed at an abstract future now reads as an intimate study of how fragile inner freedom can be. The most impactful passages, the quiet devastation of "He loved Big Brother," the cold certainty of the boots stamping forever, and the raw betrayal of Room 101, no longer shock through novelty. They unsettle through recognition. The speaker's journey through the novel is marked by a shift in perspective. In youth, the hope was that resistance, however small, might survive inside the individual. With age, that hope becomes more cautious. The realization emerges that Orwell's true horror is not surveillance or violence, but the remaking of desire itself. When power succeeds in commanding love, it has erased not just opposition, but identity. That insight lingers far longer than any image of torture or rebellion. Emotionally, the rereading leaves the speaker uneasy, reflective, and quietly disturbed. There is no catharsis, no heroic consolation. Instead, there is a sobering awareness of how easily certainty can dissolve under sustained pressure, and how comfort can coexist with surrender. From the calm of a New York library, the novel feels closer than ever, not because the world has become exactly as Orwell imagined, but because the psychological mechanisms he described remain timeless. Ultimately, this return to 1984 affirms why the novel endures. It does not shout its message. It whispers it patiently until the reader hears it echo within themselves. The final feeling is not fear alone, but responsibility, a renewed understanding that inner freedom is not permanent, not guaranteed, and never safely inherited. It must be guarded, consciously, every day.